Okay, y'all, so we're going to be talking about the quadratic formula today. This is just another method to solve a quadratic equation. Just remember what solve really means. When we're solving these, what are we getting? We're getting the zeros. We're getting the solutions. Remember, all these words mean the same thing. We're getting the x-intercepts. We're getting the roots. Okay, so on the last test, y'all found solutions by factoring, right? So the first way we know how to find solutions is by factoring. Okay, there's going to be 4 different methods you learn. We've already learned 2 already. You factor, and then you set them equal to 0. The second way we used to find solutions was the calculator. Okay, so remember you typed the equation in, and then you got the left bound and the right bound of the zeros. You may have had 1 0, you may have had 2 zeros, you may have no zeros. Okay, but that was the second way. The third way that we are going to use is the quadratic formula. Okay, and this formula is located on your formula chart, so you don't have to have it memorized, but you do need to know what everything means so you can plug everything in correctly. Okay, so that's what we're going to be working on today. Now again, this is just another method to solve. So we always want you to try factoring first. If you cannot factor, you cannot just write prime, you have to use the quadratic formula. So no more prime answers because the quadratic formula can be used if all else fails. Alright, so here's the formula. You'll see it over here to the right. Okay, so it's x equals. Now, notice that's what we've been getting as our answers are x equals. So that's what the formula says, x equals. Now, this little negative sign, I don't want you to think about that as negative. I want you to think about it as opposite. So I want you to write that down. So instead of reading as the opposite of b, or the negative b, I want you to think about the opposite of b. Because if b was negative, and I have a negative b, that's now positive. So it's better to think the opposite. So the opposite of b, plus or minus. That does not mean you get to choose one or the other. That means you're going to do the opposite of b plus all this stuff, and then you're going to do the opposite of b minus all this stuff. And then I have the square root of b squared minus 4ac. That minus 4 is always there, okay? So don't get confused by that. It's minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Your a, b, and c are going to come from your equation. So your a is what's in front of x squared, your b is what's in front of x, and your c is the constant. So it's very important that you get these terms lined up correctly in the right order, or else your a, b, and c will be off. Okay, so I'm going to go through this and I'm going to show you the steps to simplifying this. And then I will show you how to do this in your calculator, but it is very important you still know how to simplify one step at a time, because I have seen a STAR question like that where the answers are simplified to a certain point, but it's not actually the final answer. So you have to know how to do that. All right, so let's look at this. We have solve 2x squared minus 5 equals 3x. All right, we're going to have to move this 3x over, so subtract it before we do anything. We still have to get it set equal to 0 first. So that gives me 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equal to 0. Okay, and now I'm going to label what my a, b, and c are. Now normally I would try to factor this, but to teach you quadratic formula, we're just going to go straight into that. Okay, so a is what's in front of x squared, b is what's in front of x, and c is the constant. Okay, now in every single one of these problems, in all of the ones on your homework, I want you writing a equals, b equals, and c equals, or else I promise you will plug a number in wrong. Okay, so what is a here? A is 2, b is negative 3, and c is negative 5. And now we can plug this into the quadratic formula. Okay, so I'm going to have the opposite of b. What is the opposite of b? Well, b is negative 3. The opposite of negative 3 is 3. So I have x equals 3 plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and just leave those signs in there. The square root. Now, whatever you plug in here needs to go in parentheses. So in parentheses, I have negative 3, because that's my b, squared, minus 4, remember that 4 is always there, times A, which is 2, times C, which is negative 5, all over 2A. Now in the future, if you want to go ahead and simplify that stuff on the bottom, like go ahead and do 2 times 2, instead of writing 2 times 2, you can go ahead and write 4, just to save a little time. All right, so we're going to simplify this a little bit. So what can we do? So we've got 3 plus or minus the square root. Let's simplify some of this stuff under here. So negative 3 squared, that's 9. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this whole second part in my calculator. So that's negative 4 times 2 times negative 5. So I've got negative 4 times 2 times negative 5, which is positive 40. So I have 9 plus 40 underneath the radical, all over 2 times 2, which is 4. All right, so now I'm going to simplify this again. Okay, so what can we do? We've got x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 40 is 49, all over 4. So now we've got x equals 3 plus or minus, what is the square root of 49? Square root of 49 is 7, all over 4. All right, now when you get here, when you've gotten rid of everything except just those numbers, we're going to have to split this up. So we're going to have x equals 3 plus 7 over 4, and we're going to have x equals 3 minus 7 over 4. This is where you end up getting your two solutions. So I've got x equals, what is 3 plus 7? 3 plus 7 is 10. If I do 10 divided by 4, that gets me 5 over 2. So there's one answer, there's one solution. Then over here I have 3 minus 7, that's negative 4, divided by 4 is negative 1. You can either write your solutions like that, or if you want to list them, so if you want to say x equals 5 over 2 and negative 1, that's how I normally write my answer. It just seems a little less writing. Okay, now I know like that seems like a lot of work because you did a lot of simplifying. So I'm going to show you a shortcut in your calculator to where you can get the final answer, but just know you have to know how to simplify these, okay, by hand without your calculator. Okay, but I do not mind if you do the rest of these in there. Okay, I just need, especially on your homework, I need to see what A, B, and C are, and then I need to see the formula with everything plugged in. Okay, so just so you know my expectations here, I need to see this, and I need to see this. After that, well, in your answers, after that you can just type that in the calculator, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, so pull your calculator up, and what you're going to do, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to hit alpha y equals and enter. Alpha y equals. If you need to write that down somewhere, write it down somewhere. Alpha y equals. Okay, that's going to get you a fraction to where you can type all of this in. So notice your fraction should have popped up. Okay, alpha y equals and enter, and that'll get you that. Now I'm going to type in everything exactly like I wrote it. So I'm going to do 3. Now I always just do the plus first. You can't do them at the same time, but I'm going to show you a trick. So we got 3 plus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5, and then just use your arrow to go down. And you can either type in 2 times 2, or I just normally just go ahead and do the 2 times 2 is 4 and type that in. I press enter, and there we go. There's our first answer that we got, 5 over 2. Now don't clear that, and I'm going to show you a trick that'll save you some time. So use your up arrow and get your shading on top of that whole big thing that you typed in, and press enter. It'll retype it for you. Now all you have to do is use your left arrow and go to your plus sign, Okay, so if you press enter there, oh, dang it, I forgot to go change the thing. Sorry, somebody came in to talk to me. Okay, so I'm going to use my left arrow, and I'm going to go all the way to my plus sign, and I'm going to change it. I'm just going to type a minus over there. Don't hit delete or anything like that. Just type a minus, and then hit enter, and there's our other answer of -1. So from here on out, I do not mind if you do that, but again, you have to know how to simplify that a little piece at a time. All right, here we go. Next one. Use the quadratic formula to solve 2x squared plus x minus 3. All right, so we're going to subtract this 3 from both sides. So I have 2x squared plus x minus 3 equal to 0. Okay, so right here, you're going to see what you need to do on your homework. You need to write a equals, b equals, c equals. Make sure you don't label your a, b, and c until it's all equal to 0. So a is 2, b is 1, c is -3. Okay, and we're going to plug this into the quadratic formula. So I've got x equals the opposite of b, so -1 plus or minus the square root of a lot of stuff. Okay, so my b is 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times c, which is -3, all over 2 times 2, so I'm just going to put 4. Okay, I'm going to go to my calculator, and I'm going to type all of that in. So remember, you can get that fraction by hitting alpha y equals, enter. So I have -1 plus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times -3. And go to the bottom, and I'm going to type in 4. And there we go. There's our first answer. Our first answer is 1. Now remember, you can use your up arrow, get your shading on that, hit enter. I'm going to use my left arrow. I'm going to go all the way to my plus sign. And I'm going to type in a minus over my plus, hit enter, and there's our other answer. So our two solutions here, where this graph would cross the x-axis, it would cross it 1 and -3 over 2. Okay, so how many solutions do we have here? We have 2 solutions. Okay, now this talks about choosing the best method to solve. Some of you are really going to like the quadratic formula because it's easy, but unfortunately sometimes you're still going to have to factor. So we're going to look at these and see what would be the best method to solve. Okay, so number 1, I'm going to start with factoring. So let's look for a GCF. There is no GCF. So I'm going to do a times c, 2 factors that multiply to be 42 and add to be -11. I don't want you to waste your time trying to find those because there's not any factors that do that. Okay, so you cannot just write prime here. You would have to go into using the quadratic formula. Okay, we're not going to do that here, but that is the method you would need to use here. Or you could also use graphing. Just know that graphing, it's going to give you decimals. So you know, like on the problem that we got 5 over 2, it's not going to say 5 over 2. It's going to say whatever that decimal is. So just be aware of that, because if your multiple choice answers are fractions, but your calculator is giving you decimals, you need to know how to get those back and forth. All right, number 2, okay, do we have a GCF? Yes, we do, 4. I'm going to take a 4 out. That leaves me with x squared minus 9 equal to 0. Now for me, I can look at what's left, this x squared minus 9, and I can recognize that that is a difference of squares. So for me, the best method would be for me to say x plus 3, x minus 3, because I know that's a difference of squares, and I can factor that really quickly. If for you can't do it that quick, maybe graphing might be the best way here. Or quadratic formula, but you have to recognize that on this problem, there is no b. There's an a that's 1, there's a c that's -9, but your b would be 0. So if you plug that into quadratic formula, you have to know that. This might be one for me, difference of squares, so factoring would be the easiest way, because I would end up getting -3 and 3 as my solutions. but for you, graphing might be the easiest way. Okay, so just know there's different methods, but you are going to have to still know how to factor. Okay, number 3, I'm going to subtract this 9 and move it over. So I have x squared plus 8x minus 9 equal to 0. So again, remember, we want you to try factoring first. So I need 2 factors that multiply to be negative 9 and add to be 8. So to save you a little time, I'll go ahead and tell you that those numbers are negative 1 and 9. Now, can we do the shortcut here? Yes, we can, because there's a 1 in front. So honestly, factoring, if you know how to do that, that's going to be the easiest, quickest way here. So it's a negative 1, so I've got x minus 1, and it's a positive 9, so it's x plus 9 equal to 0. If I set those equal to 0, my 2 answers are going to be positive 1 and negative 9. Okay, if I'm going too fast for you here, it's probably just because you don't know how to factor. So if you, on this next test, if you do not know how to factor, you might want to use the quadratic formula or graphing. But if you know how to factor, sometimes that is the quickest way. Okay, so we're going to look at this problem, x squared minus 4x equals 12, and we're going to solve it by 3 of the ways. It says by factoring, graphing, completing the square, and quadratic formula. We have not done completing the square yet. I'm saving that for Monday and Tuesday, so we're just going to solve these the other 3 ways. Okay, so on this one, I'm going to have to subtract 12 first. So I have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equal to 0. Okay, and this one says to solve it by factoring. So I'm going to multiply a times c. 2 factors that multiply to be negative 12 and add to be negative 4. Those 2 numbers are negative 6 and 2. Okay, can we do the shortcut here? Yes, we can, because there's a 1 in front. So because it's a negative 6, I get x minus 6. Because it's a positive 2, I have x plus 2 equal to 0. Okay, now I still have to set these equal to 0 to get my solutions. I can do this in my head, but if you need to write them out, write them out. So I have x minus 6 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. If I add 6 to both sides, I get x as 6. If I subtract 2 from both sides, I get x as negative 2. And those are my 2 solutions. Now if I do this by graphing, I still have to get this equal to 0. So I have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equal to 0. I'm going to review how to do that. So you go to your y equals, and we're going to type that equation in. So we've got x squared minus 4x minus 12. And I'm going to graph that. If your graph is messed up and it doesn't look like mine, remember you can hit zoom 6 and it'll get it back to normal. Okay, so from here I'm going to hit second trace. I want the zeros here, so number 2. And I'm going to get that first one on the left. Okay, so that looks like it's at negative 2. I'm just going to check. So I'm going to get to the left of that for my left bound and enter. And then I'm going to get to the right and enter. And then one more time. So there's my first 0. That's the first one we found. X is negative 2. Now I'm going to get my second one. So I have to go second trace again. Number 2. Okay, and I'm going to get to the left. Technically I am on the left already, but I'm just going to get a little closer to it. At least where I can see it over there. So there's the left. Now I'm going to get to the right. And I'm going to press enter one more time. And there's my other 0, 6. So you see we got the same answers. It looks like it's less work, but honestly, if you know how to factor, it might be quicker. So it's up to you sometimes how you want to do these. Just choose the best method for you. Okay, again, we're not doing completing the square. Okay, but I do want to do the quadratic formula here. So I'm going to subtract 12. I have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equal to 0. Label your A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is negative 4, C is negative 12, and then you would plug it in. Okay, I think we did enough of those earlier. So plug it into the quadratic formula. Okay, but if you did that, you would get x as 6 and -2. All right, the last part of this, and we're going to skip these because if you need more practice, just go back and watch the ones we've already done. This talks about, there's actually 5 methods. We didn't really talk about using square roots. We did a little bit, but we're mainly focusing on factoring, graphing, completing the square, and quadratic formula. And we will talk about completing the square on Monday and Tuesday, so don't worry about that. But after this is over, you're going to have 4 different ways to find a solution. So there's no reason to not be able to find a solution when there's all these different ways to get it. Okay, we're now going to be talking about something called the discriminant. Now notice on the left side at the top, we've got the quadratic formula. The discriminant is everything that's underneath the radicals. So the b squared minus 4ac, that is called your discriminant. So if you look over here to the top right, that is showing your discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. Okay? So what you can do here is that discriminant will tell you something. The discriminant can tell you if there aren't any x-intercepts. So if your discriminant ends up being negative, there are no x-intercepts. Which means what? That means there's no solution. So you might want to write that somewhere in that first column. No solution. If your discriminant is negative, because here's the deal. If that is negative, you cannot take the square root of a negative number, which means it's no solution. So if you get an error in your calculator, you either need to check to see if you plugged a number in wrong, or check to see if it does in fact end up being negative underneath. If it is negative underneath, that means it's no solution. If you work out your discriminant and it's equal to 0, that means there's 1 x-intercept. This is just to tell how many x-intercepts there are. You can do this by graphing, except if you're just given a discriminant and you get asked if it's no x-intercepts, 1 or 2, you're going to have to know. Okay, but most of the time you'll be given an equation, so you could type it in your y equals and graph it if you want to. If your discriminant ends up being positive, there are 2 x-intercepts. Okay, it's not going to tell you what they are, but it will tell you if you have 1 x-intercept, 2, or none. Okay, so now we're going to look at a few quadratic functions, and we're going to decide how many solutions they have. So we are going to find the discriminant of 4x squared plus 5x equals -3. Okay, so remember here, we got to get this equal to 0 before we do anything. So I'm going to add that 3 to both sides. That gets me 4x squared plus 5x plus 3 equal to 0. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and label my A, B, and C. So A is 4, B is 5, and C is 3. Now remember that discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so I'm going to plug all this in. So I've got b squared, so that's 5 squared, minus 4 times 4 times 3. Okay, and I'm just going to type that whole thing in my calculator. So I'm going to go to my calculator, and I have 5 squared, and then I have minus 4 times 4 times 3. Press enter. Okay, so we have a negative number. We have -23. So what does that tell us? If you go back to our little chart here, if it is negative, that tells us we have no intercepts. So we would have no solutions. And here's a trick as to why this is. If you think about this discriminant, in the quadratic formula, it's under a square root. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. So when you get this discriminant as negative, square root cannot be taken, therefore there's no solution. If you were to graph this, this would just look something like this that doesn't cross the x-axis. Okay, let's look at this next one. So the same thing, state the value of the discriminant and determine the number of real solutions. Okay, so A is 2, B is 11, C is 15. This one's already ready for us. So I have B squared minus 4AC. I'm going to plug all this in. So I have 11 squared minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is 15. And I'm going to plug that all into my calculator. Okay, once you plug that in your calculator, you should end up with 1, because it was 121 minus 120. Okay, and when it's positive, look back at that one slide. If it's positive, that means there's 2 solutions. Okay, just remember this stuff. Like, if you don't remember it, just type that equation in. But you might see a question that gave you the discriminant, and you have to say, is it no solution, 1 solution, or 2 solutions? So you really do need to know it. Okay, this next one, my A is 9, B is negative 30, C is 25. Okay, so I have B squared minus 4AC. I'm going to plug all this in. So I have negative 30 squared minus 4 times 9 times 25. Go ahead and type that in your calculator. Negative 30 squared minus 4 times 9 times 25. After you type that in, you should get 0, because what happens is it ends up being 900 minus 900, which is 0. And if you get 0 here, that means there's 1 solution. Okay, we're going to do one more. So we're going to solve x squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0 using the quadratic formula. All right, so here we go. We've got A is 1, B is negative 4, and C is 6. Because you're going to see something different on this one. All right, so here we go. We've got the opposite of B. The opposite of negative 4 would be 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 6, all over 2 times A, and 2 times 1 would just be 2. Okay, now here's the deal. If you type this whole thing in your calculator right now, it's going to give you an error. Okay, so I want to show you something. So let's go ahead and simplify this by hand. So I've got 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Negative 4 times 1 times 6 is going to be negative 24 over 2. Now if we simplify this stuff underneath the radical, we have 4 plus or minus the square root. 16 minus 24 is negative 8 over 2. If you type this in your calculator, it again will give you an error, because look at this. Negative 8 under the radical, you cannot take the square root of a negative. Therefore, this would be no solution. Now, don't just assume that when you get an error, it means no solution. Make sure you go back and check that you plugged everything in right first. That if you did, and there was a negative underneath, and you can check the stuff underneath the radical, figure out what that number is. But if you do get an error there, if you get a negative, then it's going to be no solution. Okay, make sure y'all show all your work on your homework, and we will go over it next time.